to address school seismic safety, retrofits for K through 12 schools that really are at risk. This budget also includes capacity projects so that the Department of Children, Youth, and Families can move young people currently in prison to more therapeutic, age-appropriate situations. It provides an additional $34 million in capital investments for ORCA recovery-related projects. I am not vetoing any projects in this capital budget. And as I mentioned in my transportation budget remarks earlier this week, this budget helps us eventually restart construction projects that I paused due to our stay home, stay healthy order. We want to put Washingtonians back to work as soon as we can. So I want to thank the Capitol chairs for their hard work this past session and legislators for passing this bipartisan legislative work. And with that, I'm signing Senate Bill 6248. And I'm just going to put this over here for now, Angie. Okay. Safe right there. Thank you. We'll get to that ministerial work in a moment. We're also here today to sign our supplemental operating budget for 2020. A lot of work has gone into this budget, and I want to thank our legislative colleagues for their diligent work. I want to say, and I think we all know, that since they concluded their session, circumstances have changed dramatically in our state, and since they approved the supplemental budget. We know that COVID-19 pandemic has caused enormous health repercussions for Washingtonians and loss of our loved ones. And it is also having a major impact on our economy and will have a major impact on the revenues of the state of Washington in the months to come. These are difficult and challenging times in many ways, including economically for the state of Washington. But in our state, we believe in data and we believe in realistic thinking. And to be fiscally responsible and realistic, we're taking some measures today that will veto some of the new spending that the supplemental budget otherwise would have encountered and allowed. Under normal circumstances, I would not veto bills that are good policy and smart investments over time, but simply put, these are not normal times. And we cannot sleepwalk our way through this fiscal crisis that the state of Washington will be in the months and perhaps years to come. As we address the health crisis, we must look ahead to the fiscal pain as well as the health pain that is a reality. It's all but certain that we will need to make budget adjustments in the next cycle, and we need to get started right now. I've conferred with leaders in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and we all agree that we have to prepare for the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the loss of revenue that we know that we will experience. With revenue collections expected to fall sharply this year, I've asked my budget staff to scrub the budget for new spending in the supplemental budget to see where savings may be obtained. In all, I have vetoed 147 new separate expenditure items today when I signed this budget. These choices were not easy. All of them represent, I want to point out though, additional new funding that otherwise we are not spending today. So there is not any reductions in the otherwise existing levels of spending that were in previous budgets. The vetoes will reduce state spending by about $445 million from the general fund over the next 3 years. Current budget and $210 million in the next biennium. I know people will be disappointed by many of these budget changes. There's a lot of great policy ideas in there and budget allocations that at the moment have to be paused. These vetoes will impact essentially every area of the budget, and they range in size from thousands of dollars to tens of millions of dollars. During the past week of decision-making around COVID-19, I've kept the needs of all Washingtons in the front of my mind, and those thoughts played a role in our final budget decisions. And I want people to know that there's going to be people disappointed by these necessary vetoes. Some folks have been working on these great ideas for years to help them reach fruition. And I want people to know that I share the pain of those decisions. Things that I'm very passionate about, I've had to veto because of the economic circumstances. I'll just mention a couple of them. There's a provision in here for about $100 million for new counselors for our students. And this is something I believe in very deeply. My father was a high school counselor at South High School, and I know how he helped people get through high school. And I know how important counselors are. But the fact of the matter is, at the moment, we've got to defer that addition until we get our financial feet under us. I've had to veto about $50 million for a climate change fund that could help us deal with the effects of climate change. And I think people know how dedicated I am to help us defeat climate change. But as Lincoln said, as our case is new, so we must think anew, and that means we need to make some of these cuts. These investments are incredibly important. We'll be back in months and years ahead to work on them. Our work is not done. But this budget prepares us for those days in a way that is fiscally responsible. It helps us remain good stewards of the taxpayer resources and the public's faith as we go through these hard times, that we're going to be with them all the way. With that, I'm going to sign this bill. And I have signed the supplemental budget. With that, happy to stand for questions.
First, we'll go to Rachel with Keith. Senator, you mentioned that these vetoes are going to save about $445 million over the next few years. Is that enough to deal with the ongoing potential revenue shortfall that the state's likely to face, and how that compares to the last time the state saw similar challenges during the 2008?
Well, the $445 million is a substantial step to try to right our fiscal ship that we know will be in very, very troubled waters. We cannot predict how deep that will be, but we are concerned about the potential that we would run through our about $3 billion reserve. In order to reduce the chance of that, that is why we've reduced new spending by about $445 million. It is impossible to predict the months to come. We will watch this very carefully. We are proud of Washingtonians who are really committed to the Stay Home, Stay Healthy initiative, and the reason is the best way to solve our economic challenges are to solve our COVID-19 challenges. And people all over the state are staying home, taking care of themselves, and that is great economic news, because the faster we get through this pandemic, the faster we will be able to get our economy up and running again. So these things are linked. We have made a smart decision today to reduce the new spending, but ultimately, if we're going to right our economic ship, we simply have to get through this pandemic, and people are helping us do that. I want to thank Washingtonians all over the state. Once we get through this pandemic, then we can start rebuilding, and we're going to do it as fast as humanly possible. As far as how this compares to other recessions, I haven't certainly done any science, but I have to believe it's one of the most severe downturns in our revenues that we've ever seen, particularly given its rapidity. I don't believe that I can think of another time in Washington where we've had such a large number of people out of work at such a rapid pace. Our unemployment compensation claims have skyrocketed. They're 4, 5, 6 times higher in 1 week than any other week during the Great Recession. So this hit us fast, and we've got to work hard to keep the hemorrhaging to a minimum.
Next question comes from Essex with Patrick.
Yes, Governor, as you work through this over the next year or so, do you contemplate having to raise any taxes or cut any tax breaks that people or industry may now be getting?
Well, we intend to make good fiscally responsible decisions, and what those decisions are going to depend on the circumstances that then exist. I can tell you, though, that there are some things we've learned from past experience. We've learned that we can't, even in difficult times, cut essential services that then really damage us in the future. I just mentioned one that has been so damaging to our state, which is during the Great Recession. Mental health services were just cut to the bone, and you know, we're years and years after that still struggling and working hard to get out from that shadow. So we're not going to cut essential services to people in the state of Washington. We're going to find a way to finance them, and we'll all do the best job we can.
Next question is from Joe with the Seattle Times.
Governor, unless this turns around very fast, it does seem like you're going to have to make spending reductions, or the legislature, in the coming months. And given what you just said, I mean, there's only a limited amount of place in the budget where you can make cuts, especially if you consider education constitutionally protected, as the court has ruled. So how are you going to avoid slashing things like mental health spending without cutting other places like the schools?
Well, fortunately, we have made good decisions that have looked towards a rainy day, and we have about $3 billion in our reserve accounts. And we are relatively healthy in that regard compared to other states. So we do have a very healthy cushion. And I want to thank my predecessor governors and our predecessor legislators who have helped create that fund. This is exactly the reason that we have that fund, to try to cushion those shocks. So time will tell, but we're all making decisions as early as we can to the extent possible, reduce the prospects that we would go through that reserve fund. And that's what we're doing today. And I've had good discussions with legislator leaders of both parties. Even though these are very difficult cuts, they have shown that they understand their necessity. And generally, I think legislators understand, even though they may have been passionate about some of these projects, understand that we're all in the same soup, and we all got to get through it together. And these are the right direction today.
Next is Chris Daniels with Team 5.
Good afternoon. As you're probably aware, in the last hour, the president has announced new CDC guidelines for coverings, facial coverings, masks for people that are going outside. Governors in Pennsylvania, Vermont, Colorado have also urged the same. What do you say this afternoon to people about what they should do when they go outside? And secondly, where are people supposed to get these masks based on the CDC guidelines?
Well, actually, I have been vetoing bills for the last hour and a half, so I have not heard what the president had to say. Obviously, we're going to look at what the experts say in the administration, Dr. Fauci and others. I'll be looking at his advice. I know our public health officials will as well. I can tell you that I wore a cloth mask of homemade design, basically a kind of a scarf, this morning when I went out to the food bank. The members of the National Guard were wearing masks. I can tell you a couple things. One, I've been told that their primary benefit is to protect other people, not the person wearing the cloth mask, and to try to prevent droplets in the others from spreading. So you're really protecting other people when you wear this, perhaps more than yourself. The second thing is that right now, until we get additional medical quality masks, we really need our nurses to have the surgical masks and the N95s. We need our doctors and our respiratory therapists. We need our police officers and our fire department. And to some degree, our grocery workers, they need to have the first priority on the very limited supply we have. Now, we're building that supply as fast as we can. But what I would recommend to people, if you're just going for a walk, something of your own design. We will try to get you some information about the best type of fabric to use. that is much better than trying to take a surgical mask from a nurse who's going in and risking his or her life, exposing himself to COVID-19. So we'll have more things to say in the near future about what our state is advising, but I need to allow our physicians to give you advice in that regard.
Next, we go to Jim Camden with the Spokesman Review.
Governor, when will Washington renters know whether the moratorium on evictions will be extended? We're hearing that some people are being told to prioritize payment of rent if that eviction, if that moratorium isn't extended, and go to the food bank instead for food.
Well, I believe we are extending this during the course of our stay home, stay healthy measure. And so we will be extending it to that extent and then consider it after that date. And I also want to know that we are trying to ramp up our capability of delivering unemployment compensation as fast as possible. And I wish I could say those are going to go out in the next 60 minutes. But our system has been overwhelmed because of the number of people who are claiming unemployment. This is one of the reasons we put the moratorium on evictions. And we've also had so we don't want additional homelessness during this period of time. That's why we took the to help people.
Next, we go to Keith with Como. Keith, are you there? Next, we'll go to Jim Drew with the News Tribune.
Governor, back to the state budget issue. Congress is working on a fourth bill in response to COVID-19. I was wondering what your expectations are in terms of federal funding that would help Washington and other states deal with this anticipated sharp decline in funding.
Well, an obvious suggestion is the states themselves could use some help from the federal government. Governors, Republicans, and Democrats are going to be requesting additional funds for people to stay afloat, to keep their boat afloat until we get to better economic times with small business loans so we can help restaurants and small business people who are in such difficult issues, other expansions of other programs. But I think the next step has to be, in a sense, larger and more long-term one. Here's the way I look at this. In lessons from history, my mother-in-law is 102, and she knew a little bit about the Great Depression. And in the Great Depression, when it hit, the federal government tried a lot of things to get us out of the Great Depression. A whole bunch of alphabet soup agencies were started. But the only thing that got us out of that ditch was massive investment associated with World War II. And only when the community decided to face a mortal threat with a huge investment of public resources did we create the demand that we needed to really start a healthy economy. And thank goodness we did. I think we need the same thing right now, which is massive investment to drive new jobs and drive new wealth creation. We essentially have been sort of just plugging the holes in the boat here. Unemployment compensation, small business loans, these are good things. These are necessary things. The anxiety that families have today is huge about how they're going to keep their families together. But that's not enough. We have to create whole new demand for goods and services and infrastructure. Now, there's many things we could do to solve that. The two that are largest in my book are transportation infrastructure. Our United States is full of rusty old bridges that need to be replaced and new high-capacity transit that needs to be built. We certainly need that continued in the state of Washington, and every state can use that. And a second potential category is the necessary rebuilding of our energy system. We have a 19th century energy system based on a types of fuels that we have to transition off of. This is obvious. And it is a perfect moment to generate a demand to put people to work. So I'm really hopeful that the Congress will think long-term and think big and think in historic terms, because I do believe the shock to our economy is equivalent to some of the things we saw in the early 1930s. And I do not want to wait a decade to get out of the shadow of this economic chasm. We should get to it in the next several months, not in 2031. We don't have a decade to waste. So I hope Congress will act and act big and act fast.
Time for a few more questions. Next question comes from Austin Jenkins with the Northwest News Network.
Thanks, Governor. Of course, there will be those, including I think some Republicans, who will no doubt say that you probably should be cutting more at this point in anticipating the impact to revenues. I mean, there's economists saying that this is already going to be worse than the Great Recession. What's your response to the idea that perhaps you should be cutting more today?
Well, look, any number we pick would be subject to criticism as too big or too little. We made a decision of things that we believe could be deferred without injury to people in Washington State. We know that fairly shortly we'll be back one way or another, and legislators will have a chance to deal with this issue. If we did not have a $3 billion reserve, I would agree with those criticisms. But fortunately, we have that $3 billion reserve, which gives us the opportunity to adjust this budget over the next several months or year to fit whatever economic circumstances are occurring. So we felt this was prudent. It is not draconian, but it is a step to stability. And I just have to tell you that we thought long and hard and made some really hard decisions. These were not easy decisions, as a lot of people will tell you when we're cutting things that are really good ideas, two of which I mentioned. So I feel confident we're on the right track.
Next question comes from Hannah Scott with Pirate Radio.
Hi, Governor. Can you speak to, do you have any additional cuts to early childhood education
You wanna
or
talk about those?
anything to homelessness?
You want to talk about David? David Schumacher.
Sure. As we decided which things that we would cut and which things that we would protect, the categories of protection were largely public health, hospitals, child care. Those are the kinds of things that we chose not to cut at this time. So the cuts were focused on other things that weren't specifically at risk here while we're addressing this public health crisis.
Maybe one more question. Okay, final question is coming from Ashley with KMPX.
Oh, hi, Governor. So is the Washington College grant still intact for this fall?
David?
So
I'm going to let David handle this.
That's the Washington College grant becomes an entitlement on July 1st. So that means any student that shows up and qualifies gets the payment no matter what. There will be an item in the budget where we didn't make a revenue transfer, but because it's an entitlement, that means that it's a promise, and any student that shows up that qualifies will get the full amount. We don't change that at all in this budget.
Any final words, Governor?
No, I just want to thank the people in the state who are helping us get through this. As I've said, we're seeing some good signs that what we're doing is having a benefit. And in the next several days, when people decide what they're going to do with their lives, I hope they think about the safety of their families and the fact that the more we're dedicated to this project, the sooner we will be back to life as we kind of are used to. So I want to thank everybody for what they're doing and encourage them in the days to come. And wash your hands. Thanks a lot.